Bonsoir. That's the only word of French that I'm going to say. Okay, so thank you very much for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be here on this particular occasion that is a commemoration of Tagore's anniversary. A few days ago I was in Calcutta and I had the chance of also of going to the Tagore body, and this was very emotional. So it's for me it's not only one invitation, it's more than once. So it's a particular moment in my life after 27 years dedicated to Tagore's life, because I've worked on Tagore since I was a student, and I worked on the reception of Tagore in Great Britain and in France. So that's the reason why I'm going to talk a little bit about this French connection. Okay. But before we just start, I'd like to say that you will be acquainted with a certain number of very famous French people, or at least famous French people in France, Nobel Prizes, okay, mainly. But we should not forget that Tagore was very, very influential in France with the common people, okay. That's crucial, because it's not a question of the elite. Tagore was in all the households of France, or if not all the households, a major part of them. I will give you just an anecdote that my two grandmothers, who are from very different backgrounds, had Gitanjali on their bookshelves, and that was one of them was born in 1913. And the other one in 1920. So that shows you the influence of Tagore in all the different spaces or different regions of France. Now, having said this, next, I'll show you a map of France, just to have an idea of where Tagore went, because when he went to France several times. He went to France about 5 times. But the journeys of Tagore in France were more or less long. The first journey to France was only a couple of days, and that was in 1878, and the second one in 1890. In fact, just a moment, when we're dealing with Tagore's journeys in France, we're dealing with Paris, center of the map there. We're also speaking of Strasbourg. Strasbourg is on the east of France. And we're also dealing with this part. Which is very close to Marseille. So when he was coming to Europe, sometimes he would have a call at a place called Cap Martin. And he would stay there for a while. Okay? So these are the places where Tagore went several times. He also went between Strasbourg and Paris, in a town called Reims, where there are the battlefields. Okay, so he went there in 1920, for example, and very important because he went to see and this was a very emotional moment for him. He went to see where the battles took place during the First World War, and this was very emotional. He almost cried in front of the Cathedral of Reims in 1920. Having said that, having showed you that map, I'm going to say that if we have to, I mentioned the fact that he was close to to the common people, to the married man and the married woman. We have to consider that he also met very important figures. Among them, 4 Nobel Prizes. Okay, and so. They probably won't ring a bell to you, but we are going to see these names. Saint-Jean Perse, who will become Nobel Prize in 1960. André Gide, who will be Tagore's translator, who will become also the Nobel Prize in 1947. Romain Rolland. This, the connection between Tagore and Romain Rolland is very, very important. You can say that it's a friendship relationship. And Romain Rolland was the Nobel Prize in 1915. Just for your information, there was no Nobel Prize in 1914 because of the war.
So that means that the person who succeeded Tagore as a Nobel Prize was Romain Rolland. Okay. And I could forget another one, very important poet in France, Paul Valéry, should have received the Nobel Prize, but he died just before he was awarded the prize. So together it's between 4 and 5 people. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, talking about the influence of Tagore in France, maybe we should also consider that Tagore received some influence from France. And the first influence is through, and because we are dealing with art today, is through Abanindranath and Gogolendranath Tagore, okay, his nephews, right? They were not a bit younger than he was, but he would spend a lot of time with them. And both of them were extremely influenced by some of the painters from France, especially caricaturists, okay? So Gogolendranath, for example, would have a complete collection of reviews, French reviews, about caricatures of the political and social life in France. Another influence is Jyotirindra Tagore. You probably know the brother of Rabindranath. He was a translator from Bangla to French, from French to Bangla, sorry. He translated Maupassant, for example. Maupassant is very important. He is one of the key figures of short stories. And when we know the importance of short stories for Rabindranath Tagore, we may see an influence here. Now, don't forget that Dwarkanath Tagore, the grandfather of Tagore, went to France. He went to London and he went to France. And he was welcomed by Louis Philippe, who was then the sovereign. And it was a craze, in fact. When he came to France, he had some pashminas with him, dupattas of pashminas. And it became very fashionable in Paris for a kind of a decade. Okay, so there is this kind of connection which started far earlier than with Rabindranath. Next step. Oh, okay. Since I have a postcard here on the right, you see this is a postcard which was sent by Rabindranath Tagore to his wife, Mrinali Devi, in 1890. That's the first visit, or second visit of Tagore to Paris, very short one, when he goes to visit the Tour Eiffel, okay, which was just built 1 year before for the Exposition Universelle. And there he writes a letter to his wife, which was in the Rabindra Bhavan's archive. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Can you go to the next one? Next one again. All right. One of the first connections of Tagore is here. She's a woman, Alexandra David-Nesle, very famous in France for being one of the first explorers who went up to Tibet and spent decades there as a monk, because she was disguised as a man, okay? And she spent years and years as a lama, okay? Very famous explorer. And she, on the way to Ladakh and then to Tibet, she spent a few days at the Thakur Bari in Calcutta before Tagore was known. That was in March 1912. And the story goes like this. She wrote letters of recommendations for Tagore, so that if he went to France, he could be welcomed by the men of letters of France and perhaps be famous in France before London. Okay? In fact, these letters were written in March 1912, and Tagore went to London in London 1912, where the whole story begins, and he received the Nobel Prize after that, 1 year after, through the connection with William Butler Yeats, and so on. But in fact, he fell sick between March and June. That's the reason why he postponed his journey to Europe. This is something which is quite unknown, but basically Tagore could have started his career in the West through France. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, so So this is the connection in London. Next one. Okay. So Saint-Jean-Perse, at the top here, he is a very, very young poet, and he discovers Tagore through the press in London. Okay. 2 poems were edited in the Times before the whole Song Offerings, Gitanjali, was released in the press and published. So he sees those 2 poems in the Times, and he's absolutely fascinated. And he goes to see Tagore. He asks for an appointment, and Tagore receives him. Saint-Jean-Perse is only 21 years old at the time. And Saint-Jean-Perse says, okay, sir, if you want to be translated in French, you need a very good translator. And he gives the names of 2 names, Paul Claudel, who will be another very famous poet, and André Gide. And André Gide is very, very famous. He will be the translator of Tagore. He's also very famous in the world of literary French literature. Okay? So Tagore, Gide will become the translator of Tagore. He will receive the exclusive rights for 3 complete works: Gitanjali, Duck God, which is the post office, and he will never complete his 3rd translation. Can we go to the next slide? So this is André Gide on the right-hand side, and this is the Gitanjali cover in French. Next. In fact, as you know, the First World War starts in 1914, so it puts not an end to, but it puts a stop to the career of Tagore in the West. So the translations are not published. But there is something which happens in 1916. Tagore goes to Japan, okay, and when he's in Japan, there is the Message of India to Japan, which is published also in France. And that's when Romain Rolland reads Tagore and then starts this friendship between Tagore and Rolland. And everybody knows, especially in Bengal, the connection between Tagore and Rolland. It's a real friendship. Next slide. I'm going quite fast because we've got a very limited number of time. Minutes. Now, a longer stay in Paris will be in 1920, and Tagore is received by this man at the top called Albert Camus. This person is a patron, so he invites artists, in particular, to his place, very well situated. Very comfortable. The picture which you saw at the very beginning with the flowers is taken in his gardens. Okay, it's very lovely there. In 1920, Tagore will meet several very famous people. Okay, and this will also happen in 1921. I already told you about the most famous people he met. Maybe I'm going to shift and not to spend too much time on these people. If you've got questions, maybe at the end we will deal with them. But these are names, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, except maybe Henri Bergson, who's on the far end there, who was also a Nobel Prize, 1927. And if you see this quotation there, you see how abusive it is. Okay? Henri Bergson is not an exception. In fact, Tagore is pretty well received in France, but there are people who, after a while, after their first revelation or fascination towards Tagore, will tend to take distance or even judge Tagore or assess Tagore negatively. And through Tagore, they will assess India negatively, or the East negatively. So this is very important, because if we think that Tagore was unanimously well received, it's a mistake. He is creating contrasts among the population, and there are debates between what the East can bring to the West. and it becomes a subject of society. Next slide. So maybe it's time for me to show you this little movie. Can you show this little movie? It's not famous here in India. Yeah. Not going to last long, don't worry. This is Tagore's arrival from London in 1921 in Paris. Okay, so you'll see it's very interesting to see Tagore in motion. This is when he's received by Albert Camus, the patron I was just talking about. You can see his son and his daughter-in-law. And that's it. Albert Camus. Yeah. Thank you. So there will be other journeys or other stays of Tagore in Paris and in Cap Martin, which is another villa of Albert Camus in the south of France. Another visit which will last quite long is in 1924. You can go to the next slide. 1924, there will be another one just before Tagore goes to Argentina. Same, we can go to the next. In between, French people tend to go to Shantiniketan. You know, Vishva Bharati is created in 1921.
So you have artists and learning people, academics, going to Shantiniketan and teaching there. So there's a little list here. You probably don't know these names, though some are on the list there in the exhibition hall. Alain Danilou, for example, who was a musicologist as well as a musician, who spent his life in India. But it's important to know that, okay, this connection with Vishva Bharati is really fueled by the French community. There's a French teacher, but also some Indologists. For example, Sylvain Lévy is an expert in Orientalism and Indianism. He knows Tibetan, he knows Pali, and he's bringing this knowledge to the people of Shantiniketan, and then Shiti Mohan Sen and the other scientists and linguists will carry on the work. Okay? So there is a real combination, and it's a win-win strategy. In fact, at the time, we think about this Vishva Bharati as a one-shot, but it could have been like several Vishva Bharatis. The idea was to create, for example, a Vishva Bharati in Europe, so that there could be a kind of mutual understanding. Okay? So as said, in 1924, there is another visit of Tagore to Paris, and then in 1926, can proceed? Yes. In 1924, you have Tagore going to Argentina. So I've heard that somebody was from was it Guatemala? So in South America, yes? Right. Okay. So maybe you know Victoria Ocampo from Argentina? So Tagore, of course, you know the story between Tagore and Victoria Ocampo, a platonic relationship. But Victoria Ocampo was a French speaker. She spoke French fluently. In fact, she attempted to bring French into the South American territory through connections and a love for this country. So she even tried to teach French to Tagore when Tagore was recovering in Argentina. She also read Baudelaire to Tagore, and for the little story, the anecdote, Tagore didn't like Baudelaire at all. He said that it was nonsensical and too violent. I'm not surprised. Okay. I'm not going to go a little bit further, but she's
maybe we can have a look at this quotation to see how strong the relationship between Tagore and Roland was. My dear friends, this is Tagore speaking. My dearest friends, I return broken and exhausted. I come back to a country that is busy with many other things, and is not free to think about me or my ideals. I feel I'm not needed here, at least for the time being. I fear that my people will continue to regard my ideals of international friendship as premature, much more as a poetic luxury that our age cannot afford to indulge in. But at the time, I feel I have a country of my own, a friend of my own, and collaborators and helpers in my cause. I discovered them all in one through you, through your profound friendship. This discovery gives me strength, confidence, and intimate joy in this same evening ebb of my life. So this is really friendship, the country is talking about two countries here, India, I guess, because when he came back, sometimes he had difficulties in, even chanting Gitano in Calcutta. We all know this story. And at the same time, he's not really speaking of France here, because Roland is in exile, he's in Switzerland. Okay, but Switzerland and France for Tagore are his ideal two countries which are more or less on the same level, or at the same level. Now I'll switch to 1930 and I'll end it with, because otherwise I'm going to be too late. I could speak for hours on this subject. Next one again. It's very tempting, but I'm not going to talk about Chandanego and Poncheri. Next one. And I'm going to talk about 1930. Okay? So in 1930, this is the last visit of Tagore to Paris, and this is to introduce his paintings to the French public, because he's not really willing to show it in India first. He wants to see whether the Western audience will accept it, will like it. So he chooses Paris for one reason in particular. It's because he thinks that he's got friends there who can organize this exhibition. We could think of Victoria Ocampo, but Victoria Ocampo will be the substitute of the person who he was thinking about. The person he was thinking about is called André Carpeles, who taught at Chantilly-Quétaine for a while, who was a painter herself, and who was a very close friend of Abanindranath Tagore. She translated Abanindranath Tagore's works, and she was a student of his. But Victoria Ocampo will take over because André Carpeles is ill, and Victoria Ocampo knows so many people in Paris that the exhibition will be launched within a fortnight or even a week. Because before that, Tagore was in the south of France. Victoria Ocampo says, okay, let's do it, and she does it. So the open house is on the 2nd of May 1930, and it is a great success. You've got very famous visitors there, good art critics. Probably we'll talk about this later, but those critics, including someone called Henri Bidou, the name might not ring a bell to you, but the article is just perfect. He understands Tagore's paintings really well, and he tries to make a connection between his poems, his works of fiction, and his paintings. And the way he does it is really interesting, and will probably from this will emerge other criticism on this trajectory. You see the catalogue here at the top left corner for you. The introduction to the catalogue was written by Anna de Noailles. She's a poetess and very famous one in France. It's a laudatory story about Tagore's paintings, and also about their first visit between de Noailles and Tagore, which took place in 1921. It's also a nice piece of art in itself. All this to say that all the people who've written about Tagore put a lot of poetry into it. They were fascinated by Tagore. Some of them will keep on being fascinated. Some of them will just turn around and will leave Tagore just as they believed in him. They will reject it, reject him. It reminds you perhaps of William Butler Yeats' reaction, which was more or less the same. And also, we mentioned, well, it was mentioned in the introduction that you remember when Rabindranath renounced his knighthood because of the Amritsar massacre in 1919. His former friends in London did not understand his position of giving up titles such as knighthood. So he found some friends in France, and that's what happened all the time in France. He felt that he had some friends where in the United States or in the UK they would not be. So it was more like, okay, constant friendship. Okay, but this was not paved uniformly. Okay, there were people who did not believe it. Okay, I think this is it. Just to put an end to this speech, I would just say that Tagore is still commemorated in France and regularly, almost every 10 years. That is far less famous today than he used to be, obviously. And it's also partly because of the lack of translations from Bengali to French directly. So we are, unfortunately, we fail to have a kind of modern writing of Tagore, especially in fiction. So short stories and novels would require maybe more modern writing. Because Tagore, as you know, is very modernist, and probably the French language itself has accelerated its revival, and now what was revolutionary at the time in 1920 is no longer. So we need something like more exciting. Okay? Well, thanks a lot. And, maybe we'll have questions and answers.